Welcome to Learn English with Stories. Once upon a time, there was a man named Julian, who lived in a small town, in a humble adobe house with a tin roof. He didn't have many resources, but ever since he was a child, his mind was filled with dreams of greatness. Every night, he lay in his old, broken bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining what his life would be like if he were a millionaire. Chapter 1: Julian's Dreams. Julian was a humble man who lived in a small rural town where opportunities were scarce, and money even more so. Although he worked as a laborer on the lands of a wealthy landowner, he always felt that he was born for something greater. While everyone else seemed content with the little they had, Julian couldn't stop dreaming of a life of luxury and success. At night, while resting after an exhausting day, his mind filled with visions of mansions, luxury cars, and a life free from worries. Since he was a child, Julian had seen how some rich men would come to town in their fancy suits and shiny watches. To him, those people lived in a completely different world, one he longed to reach. He loved hearing stories of fortune, about how some managed to escape poverty and become millionaires. If they could do it, why can't I? He constantly thought. That idea became his driving force. However, the reality of his life was harsh. He could barely save anything from his salary and felt that, despite all his efforts, he wasn't moving in the direction he desired. The challenges were many. But what hurt him the most was seeing the resigned look on his family's faces, who did not share his ambitions. Despite that, Julian didn't let their skepticism extinguish his dreams. He promised himself that one day he would find the path to wealth. One night, as he walked through the dusty streets of his town, Julian saw in the distance the grand mansion of Don Esteban, the landowner he worked for. The mansion glowed in the dark, with lights in every window and a garden that seemed endless. That moment left a deep mark on him. He knew he couldn't keep living in the shadow of others. He decided that somehow, he too would have a life like that, no matter how long or how many sacrifices it would take. Convinced that his destiny lay beyond the limits of the town, Julian began to make plans. He didn't know exactly how he would become a millionaire, but what he did know was that he had to step out of his comfort zone. If he wanted to change his life, he would have to take risks, learn, and seek opportunities elsewhere. And so his journey towards success began. Chapter 2: The Risky Decision. One day, while working in the fields, he overheard two city men talking about business. They were discussing an investment opportunity in the city, something related to land sales and the construction of new buildings. Julian didn't fully understand what they were talking about, but he felt this was the sign he had been waiting for. It was time to take a risk and leave the town in search of something better. For weeks, he saved every penny he could. He sold the few possessions he had and asked his uncle for a small loan, which helped him gather enough to embark on his journey. Although his family looked at him with concern, Julian was determined. He knew that the only way to change his fate was by leaving the comfort of the known. So, one morning, with an old suitcase and a few bills, he took the bus to the city. When he arrived in the big city, everything was overwhelming. The streets were crowded, the buildings were enormous, and the pace of life was much faster than in his small town. But Julian was not intimidated. He knew this was the place where he could find the opportunities he had been looking for. The first thing he did was look for work since he needed to support himself while he figured out his plan to become a millionaire. He found a job as an assistant at a construction site, a tough job, but one that allowed him to observe how the business world worked in the city. While he built walls and carried materials, Julian listened to the conversations of the engineers and businesspeople who visited the site. Little by little, he began to realize that money wasn't in physical labor but in ideas and investments. He realized that to become a millionaire, he had to learn how to play in that world. Even though life in the city wasn't easy, and many times he felt lost, Julian never lost sight of his goal. He knew this was just the first step on his path to wealth. The important thing was to stay focused, keep learning, and, above all, be ready for any opportunity that came his way. Chapter 3: The First Stroke of Luck. One day, while working at the construction site, Julian overheard one of the engineers talking about a new investment in land outside the city. The project was ambitious but had the potential to generate huge profits. The land was undervalued, and it was expected that, in a few years, its price would skyrocket due to the city's expansion. Julian, always attentive, felt that this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. With the little money he had managed to save, he decided to take a risk and invest in a small plot of land. It was a risky decision since he practically had no money left for the month, but he was convinced it was worth it. "If I don't risk it now, I'll never get ahead," he told himself. At first, his friends and co-workers called him crazy, but Julian was willing to take the gamble. Months passed, and although things seemed to move slowly, Julian never lost hope. He kept working hard, investing the little he earned in improving his knowledge about investments and real estate. He attended free seminars, read books from the library, and asked questions to anyone who knew more than him. He was determined to master the business world. A year later, the city began expanding in the direction Julian had predicted. Suddenly, the land he had bought for a fraction of its value started being sought after by big developers. Offers began to pour in, and Julian, who had once been the poor man from the village, found himself with the possibility of selling his plot for a substantial amount. When he finally closed the deal, Julian had tripled his initial investment. He wasn't a millionaire yet, but he had taken his first big step down that path. That small victory showed him that, with patience and wisdom, the dreams that once seemed impossible could become a reality. Chapter 4: The Expansion. With the money he earned from his first investment, Julian decided to keep moving forward. He had no intention of stopping there. He knew that if he wanted to reach the lifestyle he had dreamed of, he had to keep taking risks and expanding his portfolio. With his new income, he bought more land in strategic areas and began to diversify his investments. This time, he didn't just buy land, he also invested in small local businesses. His success wasn't immediate. Some of his investments failed, and there were moments when he felt he could lose everything. However, unlike his previous life, Julian now saw failures as lessons. He knew that the road to wealth wasn't straight and that each mistake brought him closer to his goal. He learned to be more cautious and to analyze every opportunity more carefully. Over time, Julian became well known in the local business world. He began to form alliances with other entrepreneurs and to learn from their experiences. His network of contacts grew, and with it, his opportunities. He was no longer the lone man who had arrived in the city with an empty suitcase. Now he was a respected investor, known for taking calculated risks and being a visionary. As his fortune grew, so did his ambitions. Julian didn't want to be just a local businessman, he wanted to expand his ventures nationwide. He knew that to achieve this, he would need more than just capital, he would need knowledge and skills he didn't yet have. So, he began to surround himself with people more successful than him and to learn from them. His determination and perseverance led him to open his own real estate development company. With it, he started building large projects in the city and its surroundings. What had once been a distant dream was now a tangible reality. Each day that passed, Julian was closer to becoming the millionaire he had dreamed of being. Chapter 5: Julians Summit. After several years of hard work, calculated risks, and unwavering perseverance, Julian finally achieved the status he had longed for. His real estate development company became one of the largest in the country. The projects he led not only transformed cities but also created jobs and improved the quality of life for thousands of people. Julian didn't just accumulate material wealth, he also gained respect and admiration. What set him apart from other millionaires was his humble origins and his desire to help others follow in his footsteps. He never forgot where he came from, which is why he began investing in education programs for young entrepreneurs from low-income backgrounds. He knew that knowledge was the key to escaping poverty and wanted to share the lessons he had learned. Despite his success, Julian remained humble. He still remembered the nights he would gaze at the lights of Don Esteban's mansion, dreaming of a better life. Now, he owned several mansions, but he understood that the true value of his life wasn't in possessions but in the journey he had traveled and the people he had helped along the way. One day, as he walked through the city he had helped build, Julian stopped to observe a building under construction. He smiled as he saw the workers and remembered how he had started in that same place, with a shovel in his hand and a dream in his heart. Now, it was he who financed those projects, who gave employment to hundreds of people. He had come full circle. Julian, the man who had once been poor, now lived the life he had always dreamed of. He had achieved his goal of becoming a millionaire, but what filled him with the most pride wasn't the money. It was the fact that he had achieved it through his effort, vision, and perseverance. He knew his story would inspire others, and that made him feel richer than any fortune he could amass.